My name is Mackenzie Parrott, and this is my grief and loss presentation, Meaning at the Threshold, Spiritual Frameworks and Existential Meaning Making in Mourning. Today, I'm presenting on how spiritual mourning practices function as existential meaning-making systems. Rather than focusing on techniques, I will explore how structured spiritual frameworks help individuals confront mortality, organize grief, and reconstruct identity after loss. I will focus on two examples, the modern death doula movement and the Tibetan Buddhist Bardo Todo. My goal is not to promote belief systems, but to understand their psychological role in grief adaptation. Thesis and purpose. My central argument is that spiritual mourning practices reduce existential distress by restoring narrative coherence and symbolic continuity. Grief destabilizes core assumptions about safety, fairness, and identity. When someone dies, particularly someone central to our life story, narrative continuity is disrupted. Meaning reconstruction research suggests that adaptation requires rebuilding that narrative. Spiritual systems often provide structured frameworks that help individuals situate loss within continuity rather than chaos. Existential foundations of grief. From an existential perspective, grief activates concerns about mortality, isolation, and meaning. Loss disrupts what Niemeyer describes as the assumptive world, our beliefs about predictability and coherence. It can also destabilize identity. Shared roles and imagined futures disappear. This can increase mortality salience, a heightened awareness of one's own death, which often intensifies anxiety. When individuals cannot integrate loss into a coherent narrative, they are at greater risk for complicated grief. Grief is therefore not only emotional pain, it is existential rupture. Psychological role of ritual. Ritual plays a powerful psychological role in mourning because it introduces structure into emotional chaos. When grief feels disorganized and overwhelming, ritual creates a sequence, a beginning, middle, and end. That structure mirrors narrative reconstruction. Ritual also externalizes emotion. Rather than grief remaining entirely internal, it becomes expressed through shared symbolic behavior. This reduces isolation and increases communal containment. Research by Norton and Gino demonstrates that ritual participation reduces grief intensity by restoring perceived control. Grief often produces helplessness. Ritual reintroduces agency through intentional symbolic action. Importantly, ritual does not require religious belief to be effective. The structure itself appears psychologically stabilizing. The rise of death doulas. The modern death doula movement has emerged partly in response to the medicalization of dying. In many Western settings, death occurs in institutional environments with limited ritual structure. Death doulas provide non-medical, emotional, and spiritual support, facilitate life review, assist with legacy projects, and guide families through bedside vigil practices. These practices reintroduce intentional meaning into the dying process. Rather than death being solely a medical event, it becomes a relational and narrative transition. Existential functions of death doulas. Existentially, death doulas support narrative closure. Life review allows individuals to see their lives as coherent stories rather than fragmented endings. Legacy projects create symbolic continuity. Values, relationships, and identity extend beyond physical death. Structured presence at the bedside reduces existential isolation. No one dies alone in a symbolic sense. From a meaning reconstruction perspective, these practices support narrative integration and identity coherence. They organize mortality into meaning. Tibetan Buddhist Death Framework. The Tibetan Buddhist Bardo Todol outlines the traditional states between death and rebirth. Traditionally, it is read aloud to guide consciousness during these intermediate states. Rather than framing death as annihilation, this system presents death as transition. It provides detailed orientation for navigating uncertainty. By embedding death within continuity, it reduces existential ambiguity. Existential functions of Tibetan framework. The Tibetan framework reduces annihilation anxiety by situating death within a larger cosmological narrative. Impermanence is normalized as a fundamental feature of existence. Structured ritual chanting provides communal containment and reduces isolation. A detailed cosmology reduces ambiguity. Existential anxiety increases when uncertainty is unbounded. Even for individuals outside the tradition, this framework illustrates how humans construct narrative systems that transform mortality into organized meaning. Comparative existential functions. Although death doulas and Tibetan ritual arise from different cultural contexts, they serve similar existential functions. Both provide narrative coherence at the threshold of death. Both reduce isolation through communal presence. Both offer symbolic continuity. Empirical research supports that structured meaning-making in ritual reduce distress and promote adaptation. Across cultures, humans create systems that transform mortality into meaning. Clinical implications. Clinically, this means grief assessment should include existential and spiritual dimensions. We can explore how clients understand death, continuity, and meaning. Meaning disruption may present as depressive symptoms, anxiety, or rumination. Normalizing death anxiety and exploring symbolic continuity can support adaptation. Supporting culturally congruent ritual and collaborating with spiritual leaders when appropriate strengthens ethical and culturally responsive care. Ethical considerations. Ethically, counselors must avoid imposing spiritual frameworks. Our role is not to provide doctrine, but to facilitate meaning-making within the client's worldview. Practicing cultural humility and remaining within scope of practice ensures respect for client autonomy. We support reconstruction of meaning without directing belief. Conclusion. Grief is existential rupture. It confronts individuals with mortality, isolation, and disruption of meaning structures. Spiritual mourning practices endure because they address these existential dimensions. They provide structure in chaos, restore narrative coherence, reduce isolation, and offer symbolic continuity. Understanding how these frameworks function psychologically strengthens our ability as grief counselors to support clients as they reconstruct meaning in the presence of loss. These are my references. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate it.